Right. Welcome again, everyone. We are so happy to have you here tonight for our Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion dialogue, collaborating for equity and diversity. We've got a number of things we're going to cover this evening. Here on the agenda, you see that we're going to set the space just a little bit before we get into recapping some key terms, some things that would be useful to hear and know. We'll have time for even a little break, so just know that. And then we'll really get into those last two blocks there that you see around building equity and disrupting the status quo, and building diversity and disrupting the status quo. Maybe some new terms, maybe some familiar things. We hope you can come away with, a couple pieces that go into your organizing and beyond. And then we'll have space for group discussion as well as questions, reflections before we wrap up and head out. And we will do our best to be ending early or on time tonight because we definitely respect and value your time. If you have questions as we go along, please drop them in the chat. Use the raise hand function. Because we have a smaller group, I think we really can maximize the intimacy of that and do with it as we see fit. So just some small housekeeping items. And if you would prefer closed captioning, you should also see that tool at the bottom of your Zoom bar, the CC function, just to call that out. And with that, to provide some grounding and really getting the space into a good place, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Matt. Land acknowledgement.
Awesome. Thanks, Chelsea. So the land acknowledgement here. First, let us acknowledge with deep respect the lands upon which we gather today are the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Ute, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Apache, Comanche, Osage, and Kiowa nations and peoples. That we respect Indigenous stewards of this land, past, present, and future, and thank them for their generous generations of caring for these lands, its fresh flowing air and clean waters, and precious living inhabitants large and small. We remember the painful history of genocide and forced removal under settler colonialism and commit ourselves to dismantle such structures that perpetuate this legacy and the status quo. As these words of acknowledgement are spoken, may they reaffirm the ties to all Indigenous peoples of over 48 historic tribes to these unceded lands that we call Colorado. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Chelsea for a diversity welcome as well.
Thank you, Matt. To build on that, we feel it's important to give a warm welcome for diversity. We welcome people from all over the state. We welcome older people and younger people. People of all colors, cultures, ethnicities, and religions. We welcome people of all sexual and gender orientations, identities, and expressions. We welcome diversity, all that makes us unique, and also what makes us the same. So with that, some quick introductions here so that you know who you're hearing from this evening if you don't already know us. My name is Chelsea Alexander. I use she, her, aya pronouns. I live in Lakewood, Colorado, and I work as the Movement Building and Volunteer Director at 350 Colorado. For a further practice for inclusivity, providing some descriptors, if that is helpful for you. I'm wearing a green shirt this evening, my hair pulled back, a white woman in early 30s, and I will pass it over to Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Burke. I am the 350 Colorado, Northern Colorado team coordinator. I live in Fort Collins, and as my physical description, I am a white woman in my 20s. I have glasses on. I have brown curly hair with pink streaks in it, and I'm wearing a brown shirt tonight. And I will pass it to Matt.
Thanks, Sarah. My name is Matt Gose. I am the Promoting Climate Solutions Coordinator here at 350 Colorado. And some of my visual descriptors are I'm wearing a black and gray Colorado hat, white man, almost middle aged at this point actually, and yeah, wearing a brown 350 Colorado branded shirt. Um, yeah, so we're gonna move on to I guess some of the things we hope to gain from this workshop with Chelsea.
Thank you. Yeah, short and sweet here. We know we cannot force you to come away with anything in particular from a session like this, but we do hope that what we will cover will further ground us in concepts of not just inclusive organizing, but what it means to build a diverse and equitable movement. And that involves learning and unlearning and seeing those blind spots that come up sometimes. We'll hopefully share some tools as well that will help ensure that as individuals and then the movement as a whole are as inclusive as possible, which is best achieved through a diverse movement, and really better understanding ways that we all can, right, support equitable and diversity-focused organizing. So it will not be an exhaustive list, but things that we have come up with in our own organizing experience. Before we go any further, we must ground ourselves with acknowledgement and gratitude. Starting with gratitude, we want to give a warm thank you to Angela Davis of iProject LLC. We worked with her in the past to cover these subjects and themes and learn and unlearn, as well as past workshops that we put on that maybe you were a part of. Ultimately, the curriculum then, as it developed from that point, it has come to be that it is partially developed by a leadership team that carries many different identities of privilege. And we understand that this perspective may not resonate with everybody. And it might resonate most with other allies and accomplices that hold similar privileges. So as white people here this evening, younger white people, we want to just hold that own space of where we are and not project or assume to know more than we know. Our sincere hope is that allies, accomplices, activists, and organizers of any and all backgrounds will find some of this, if not all of this content, to be valuable and applicable. And then to end with some more gratitude, huge shout out, so much appreciation to the Community Language Cooperative, CLC, and Valentina, who's here tonight supporting us. Again, language justice is very important in this work we do, so just have to really call that out. And with that, I will hand it over to Matt.
All right, so I'm going to go over a couple of expectations and container agreements that hopefully we can all agree to for this workshop, and it will, yeah, provide some guidelines, I guess, for us along with the overarching goal. And that goal is to create a safe and nurturing environment that values and supports all members and helps us grow and learn together. Yeah, we can move to the next one. So some of these expectations and container agreements. So first of all, about to speak about what you can expect from us as facilitators. And you can expect us to be judgment-free and to listen to all of your comments, questions, everything above. To show patience, to explain to the best of our ability and admit that when we might not have the answer, to be completely honest and open. And is there anything else that you all think we should be held to as people attending this call? All right, and we can move on down to what we're going to ask of you all as attendees. Some formalities here, just putting an asterisk in the chat or using the Zoom raised hand function or literally just raising your hand if you would like to speak or be called on to answer to a question or have a question, any of the above. Being okay with being vulnerable and honest. I know that some people here we're meeting for the first time, and so yeah, we're strangers. We just want to encourage you to be as comfortable and honest and vulnerable as you'd like to be during this call. Please come with an open mind and lean into your curiosity. Please speak from your own experiences and not the experiences of others. Ask for what you need. If I'm speaking too fast, and I am terrible at speaking too fast, say, Matt, slow down, and I will, 100%. And yeah, please turn on your camera when you can for a more intimate experience, and ask questions. That's what we're going to be here for. We might not always have the answers, but just having that conversation is really important here. And as always, yeah, if there's anything else, feel free to bring it to our attention. Moving on from there, what we can all expect from each other is just to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak who wishes to, and not to talk over each other, to actively listen to understand, and to be willing to consider views different from your own. Having the willingness to drop your mask, let your guard down, and just show your humanness. And once again, with everything that we've got here, if anything pops up that you're like, you know what, that'd be great to add in future calls, do not hesitate to speak up. And then we'll move on after that into who we are as 350 Colorado. So starting off here, we kind of have our pillars that we work on of our campaigns. And yeah, this is how these principles are actually realized. So we have our building a powerful grassroots movement, keeping all of our fossil fuels in the ground, promoting just and equitable solutions, and defunding climate disaster. And yeah, these principles show them, and principles and values show in in our organization, and how they're actually realized in building an intersectional movement. Our campaigns move forward in all these different areas, but through all of these different campaign areas, we try to practice these JEDI values that we're going to kind of go into tonight. What is JEDI work, you might be asking yourself, and some of you might be like, I know what that is. But it stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Has anyone, I guess, raise of hands, heard of JEDI work before this, whether that's with us or somebody else? Awesome. Sweet. Yeah, so these different aspects here, when we talk about what we're going to be talking about tonight, more so with the diversity and equity portions of it. Apologies. Yeah, it's big, and it's going to be heavy at points. It's going to be needed. So just feel free to take breaks. Feel free to take a deep breath. All of that stuff. So into the actual nitty gritty of it all. What is JEDI work? J for justice. The protection and upholding of rights of groups that face higher risks and are therefore more vulnerable. We often talk about a just and equitable just transition. And a lot of that comes into like, how are people going to move on, for example, that are, maybe working in the oil and gas industry, or how, is a community such as Commerce City that's being, adversely affected by climate change and pollution going to be affected compared to maybe more or less marginalized groups. Equity, removing obstacles such as discrimination, powerlessness, and a lack of access so that individuals or groups have fair and just opportunities. In a lot of ways, that also bleeds into that justice side of things. A large portion of what we're going to be talking about tonight in diversity, a community in which a variety of societal, cultural characteristics and perspectives exist. We'll hammer this home a lot throughout this presentation, but the whole idea of that, oh yeah, everybody that's like-minded and participates in this groupthink knowledge, and that is somehow supposed to be effective in generating new ideas. It's just absolutely not. So obviously you want to have more diversity in these spaces. And then lastly, and not least, inclusion. The act of creating environments in which all people are welcomed, respected, supported, and valued to participate, can contribute and bring their full potential and authentic selves to the table. So once again, if anything is going on here, I'm speaking too fast, I'm mumbling, anything along those lines, please call us out so that you can have a quality experience here. Oh, sorry. See, right there. That's perfect. Thank you, Valentina. I'm going a little bit too fast. So yeah, with that, I'm going to continue on to how do we practice these JEDI initiatives. Okay, so what is looking to be gained from this workshop? We hope that through great discussion and learning opportunities, that everyone will have a better understanding of these JEDI values by the end of this call, and can leave the space with a more open mindset and willingness to apply these JEDI values to our everyday lives. We aren't necessarily, I guess, here, actually, I'll get around to that. Sorry, I'll continue. So what kind of JEDI work does 350 Colorado do? We here at 350 Colorado make an effort to tie in these JEDI values into our everyday work uh, through different aspects. For example, having an opportunity with Valentina here for translation, really trying to cater to accessibility with people when we host in-person events, whether that's childcare or making sure to hold it during hours of the day when people aren't working. And just really trying to encourage people to feel comfortable sharing their ideas and concerns. Feedback is always so important. You might ask yourself, why does this work matter? It's vitally important. And this work is vital to ensure that every perspective is heard and that everyone is able to access the framework to make change and feels comfortable doing so. The last thing we want is to have people that are really engaged and really excited to be involved to help move us through this climate crisis, to mitigate this climate crisis. But if they can't, read the materials we've got out there, or they're not available to, join a call for some reason because it's in the middle of the day, all of that kind of stuff. All of this to say, we don't feel high and mighty, because we do this. It's needed and it's expected, and we'd hope that all kinds of different, not just nonprofit organizations, not just climate organizations, but organizations as a whole, pursue these JEDI initiatives. It's not fighting for a transition to a sustainable future, just fighting for a transition to a sustainable future, but a just transition, signifying that nobody will be left behind and that disproportionately impacted communities will no longer be viewed as an afterthought. Yeah, this will show up a variety of ways in our material today, and you might notice in a lot of our other calls how this may show up. So we'll move down now into a recap from Sarah from our last workshop.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
So last year we put on a two-part series on inclusion and how we can work together to make the climate movement a more inclusive space for everybody. So if you didn't catch that one, totally fine. We're going to do a little recap, but it is on our YouTube. It is recorded. So if after tonight you're like, yes, I want more, those presenters were dazzling, I need to know all about inclusivity, you can head to our YouTube and check those out. So this little chart shows inclusivity on a scale of uniqueness and belonging. So if someone has high uniqueness and feels that, and also feels a high sense of belonging in that space, that's inclusion. But if someone maybe does not feel comfortable or safe in their uniqueness and also does not feel belonging, that would be exclusion. And then with a low level of belonging and high level of uniqueness, that would be differentiation, which is also known as tokenism, and we will touch on that later. And then if someone were to feel high belonging but low uniqueness or low safety in their uniqueness, that would be assimilation, where they feel like they're kind of forced to act the same as other people in order to be safe or comfortable in that space. So obviously, we are always shooting for that high belonging, high uniqueness. For inclusion, we know that the climate movement is going to take all of us, and previously it has not been an inclusive space. But that's why we're doing this, right? That's why we're here to learn and to grow together and to figure out what we can do to make this movement truly inclusive. So that being said, there are a few barriers to inclusion. We're going to do a quick little speed run of these. So here are all the different things we're going to talk about, and we are going to kick it off with ethnocentrism. And this is the tendency for individuals to place their own group at the center of their observations of others and the world. And this is something that we inherently do, right? We are only able to see the world through our own perspective, and we use our own experiences to kind of color how we see the world. So that's not necessarily a problem, but it becomes a problem and it becomes ethnocentrism when we use that to decide that our group is better, or that all other groups should act more like our group or should be more like our group. This doesn't allow for inclusion. It doesn't allow for other perspectives, because you automatically are placing people below yourself in terms of culture or race or ethnicity. So we can clearly see why that would be a problem. So now we are going to go into prejudice, which is an unfounded opinion, attitude, or belief relating to an individual or group that represent them in an unfavorable light. So it's basically just something that's unfounded, that's not true, that's not based in the truth that you think, and that colors your perspective of how you think about a person or a group, which obviously isn't fair. It doesn't allow them to be unique or to feel comfortable in that space because you've already made a judgment about them and believe that as how they are, who they are. And we can move to privilege. So, privilege is an advantage held by a person or group based on age, race, ethnicity, gender, class, or some other cultural dimension which gives power over others. So, it's important for us to kind of dig into that, to acknowledge our own privileges that we may hold, and to kind of figure out how that changes the way in which we exist in the world. And this is pretty uncomfortable to do, right? Because we're here, we care about other people, and it's uncomfortable to think that certain identities give us power over other people. And that's not to say that if you hold these privileged identities, your life is easy, you've never had to work for anything, because that's absolutely not the case. It's just like a little step up that you got that maybe other people didn't get. And we can use these privileges, we can better understand them and use them to help other people and to try to work to make things more fair and to bring other people in to this movement. Next, we have bias. Here are a few different definitions. So we have an inflexible, conscious or unconscious, positive or negative belief about a specific category of people, or a disproportionate weight in favor or against an idea, person, or thing, usually in a way that is closed-minded, prejudicial, or unfair. And biases can be innate or they can be learned. So you can have like a bias, like if you prefer chocolate over vanilla ice cream, that's a bias towards chocolate ice cream, which is fine, which is obviously not harmful. Um, but it becomes harmful when we have biases or thoughts about another person or another group of people, because it changes the way in which we interact with them. It changes how we see them and thus how they're treated in this space. So that's when they can become really dangerous and harmful. And lastly, we have stereotypes. Oh, I didn't know why I wasn't showing up on the slide. So a stereotype is an exaggerated belief, image, or distorted truth about a person or group, a generalization that allows for little or no individual differences or social variation. So here on the slide, there's a few listed examples of stereotypes. We have cultural, social, racial, gender, and religious stereotypes. And if you've ever been stereotyped, you know that it's really harmful. It doesn't feel good, and it doesn't allow people to feel like unique individuals when they're judged based on a group. And we can't just make these sweeping generalizations, right? That's not fair to generalize a whole group based on one idea. And it's probably not even like they're not true. And it is super harmful to stereotype, to uplift and uplift that status quo of using stereotypes, going along with them. And it's also really harmful to be stereotyped. And then there's a little graphic, a cheeky little one that our coworker Bobby put in that she really likes. And lastly, I know that's a lot. I know those are a lot of words, a lot of definitions, but we want to talk a little bit more about what we can do to combat, challenge, and dismantle them so we can be curious. And you all are already checking that one off. You're here tonight to learn more, which is awesome. And we can figure out where some of those biases or prejudices might exist within ourselves, right? What we might have grown up with based on our education or what community we were raised in. We might have some learning to do and also some unlearning to do, because a lot of those are things that you just grew up with that you might feel to be true. Um, but now it's your job to figure out how to unlearn that and how to change and grow away from those things. And in doing this, we can be humble and realize that we don't know all the answers and that that's okay, that we're all human, we're going to make mistakes. But when we do make mistakes or when we do use harmful language, we can take about accountability and try to rectify those things and try to learn and do better in the future because that's all we really can do. And we can be courageous. We can have courageous conversations. We can call in or call out people who are using and uplifting these harmful things that don't allow us to have true inclusion. And we can always ask questions. We can try to learn from each other, but it is also important to note that it is not, if someone is in a marginalized group or if someone is in a minority, it is not their job to teach us, right? It's not their job to inform us. We can definitely learn from them if they're willing to share their story, but it's not always appropriate to ask those questions or to put that on them. And now I know I'm a little tired of talking and you might be tired of listening. So we do have a little break baked in. But before the break, does anyone have any questions or anything on the content covered so far?
Good.
Cool. Well, if you think of anything, let us know or put it in the chat. And we will see everyone back here at 6:44.
all of my snacks and my dinner. I left at Jay John's house, so I'm just gonna go back again. But I'm gonna finish some homework and chill here for a little bit because I don't want to have to. Like I covered my bed and stuff, and I'm like, well, that just made me even less inclined to actually have to clear it off. So, but at least I'll have food and stuff.
Oh, that's good. Oh, whoops.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a very restful 5 minutes, got a little water, took a little break. And now we are going to dive into our new content for tonight about building equity and disrupting the status quo. And with that, I will pass it to Chelsea.
Thank you, Sarah. Folks can still see my screen okay? I hit the wrong pause button earlier. That didn't pause the recording, so everyone can take a break during their recording in the future. So yes, as Sarah said, now that we've kind of refreshed ourselves or set more of a foundation on where we've came from, we really want to get into this tonight with this first set of themes here within building equity and disrupting the status quo. And when it comes to building equity, I think one important thing to call out first is that a lot of times this gets swapped and confused with equality, right? They feel like they're synonyms, but they're not. You see that little picture in the corner. Equality is everyone being given the same thing, regardless of what they need. We all are given 2 apples, even though we can all maybe eat different amounts of apples. So equity is really focusing on just that. What is it that could be provided to individuals based on their uniqueness and needs that will bring everybody up together? So just by glancing at it, it could be perceived as unfair, right? Why does that one person on the far right there get the tallest platform? Well, if you look closely, they appear to maybe be the shortest one. So it's just taking into account context and what really matters for building an equitable movement. So providing fair and equal opportunities based on those individual needs is really hinged on the prioritization of being open and having and developing that sense of belonging for others. And this comes from learning by listening and doing. That does require that folks kind of decentralize their own experience in that way and acknowledge that people are coming to the table with different perspectives and experiences. And when we can acknowledge that and learn by listening, we really have the means at that point then to better uplift them and bring them along in the movement in the way in which they want to be. And when that really comes into disrupting the status quo, we'll get into this a little bit more on our following slides, but it's important to recognize and call out that the climate movement does not exist in a silo or a vacuum, right? It is deeply intertwined with so many other forms of oppression and things like colonialism and capitalism and things that have ultimately given deep roots to things like oppression. So the climate movement has to be intersectional, and by doing that, diversity comes with that because there are so many other issues that feed into how the climate crisis plays out. And we know that people of different places of geography or privilege and responsibility differently. So just looking at the hurricanes that have happened this week, right? Those people being located along the coast and in flood zones and with varying access to being able to evacuate safely and to get what they need. All of those things are feeding into what is really creating or not creating an intersectional movement. So in order to disrupt the status quo, we have to center that in our organizing as we go along. And as Matt touched on earlier too, this can look like ensuring that accessibility is at the forefront and that we are making sure people get what they need for an equitable experience. So one of my favorite terms here, psychological safety, I'll pass it over to Sarah and chat more about it.
Yeah, so this is not something I knew about before we started doing these JEDI presentations. But psychological safety is defined as an environment that encourages, recognizes, and rewards individuals for their contributions and ideas by making individuals feel safe when talking or taking what can be interpersonal risks. And so when we have a lack of that, it can create groupthink or inhibit true teamwork and bonding, and can lead to in-groups and out-groups, and also can create blind spots. So what does it look like? It can look like giving feedback, pushing back, sharing an idea, being able to disagree respectfully and kind of open a conflict where you figure out how to best look at opposing ideas and work through them. And it feels like authenticity. It's when you're truly listened to and you're heard. It creates a collaborative environment where people are able to share and learn from each other and become better together. So, psychological safety is so important in all spaces, but especially in this space when we talk about the status quo and we talk about doing things to challenge or dismantle the status quo. Because a lot of times in this movement, when there isn't inclusion, it's a lot of voices saying similar things. It's a lot of similar ideas, which is great, but it can also create harm when we're not hearing from other people, when we're not getting different perspectives. And when people are saying similar things, it might be easy to share, but it might be harder to share when you're challenging norms and when you're challenging this idea of the status quo. So it's important that we work to make people feel safe doing that, and not only making them feel safe enough to share, but then being able to take feedback and take those ideas and validate them, talk through them, work through them, figure out how to incorporate them, because it doesn't matter if they're able to share if their ideas are just going to get brushed off, or if people are just going to steamroll and keep doing things to uplift the status quo, or keep doing things that we have always been doing things that keep business as usual going big and strong, right? So accepting that pushback, which sometimes is hard, sometimes it's not fun to hear that people have differing ideas or ideas that challenge things that you might already know. But it's so important in order to create that movement that we're all envisioning, to create spaces in which people with different perspectives and ideas can share and feel heard and valued. So, with that all, I'll give you a second to reflect and think on that while we pass it over to Matt for psychological availability.
Thanks, Sarah. This is another one of those terms that is directly linked. You'll hear another one, a psychological blank, later on as well that we'll talk a little more about. But yes, psychological availability and how that is also directly connected to psychological safety. So, what is psychological availability? Psychological availability is the sense of possessing the physical, emotional, and psychological resources necessary for investing in yourself for the betterment of role performance. You can almost kind of think about this like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the bottom, you kind of have what you basically need, and that would be more considered, I think, psychological safety, having that environment that's nurturing. That second level there, that second tier, is going to be a lot of those foundational mental things that are going to be important. Have you had enough food and water for the day? Are you in a safe space to be able to communicate your thoughts and ideas? Are you emotionally in a good state of mind? All questions you need to ask yourself if you're going to be at peak psychological availability. It's often a reflection of an individual's resource level, and leaders can provide support and give confidence to volunteers for promoting their employees' psychological availability. This is not something that's just in the climate movement. Not necessarily that. It is also something that applies to your work life and also to your everyday life on completing tasks. but when it relates to the climate movement works best when we have a variety of perspectives. And in order for that to be the case, we need the organizing work to represent these different perspectives, and we need these people to feel safe to speak up. Speaking of that connection that we talked about earlier and how it's directly connected to psychological safety, there's a shared perception that there is a safe environment for interpersonal risk taking, trust, respect, and mutual respect. And how can we reinforce that time and time again so that people are really able to come out of their shells? When we talk about this whole concept here and what motivates people to do good work, it falls into those baskets of support, instilling confidence, mutual respect. And like I mentioned earlier, we'll continue to drill this down a little more later with psychological meaningfulness. But with that, pass it back to Sarah with some organizational justice talking points.
Yeah. So, for organizational justice, there are 4 different pillars. And obviously, it's called organizational justice. The research on this has been done mostly at organizations. But as I start talking through it, you're definitely going to see how it applies to the movement and applies to all the different topics we've been going through. So the 4 different pillars are distributive, procedural, interactional, and informational. So starting with distributive justice, this is fairness in outcomes like pay and workload. So if an organization has distributive justice, their employees feel like there is justice in pay, in workload, and also things like feedback. And this is also a time when we can think about what equality would say and what equity would say. Like if someone might need to make more money to be able to support themselves or their family, or if someone maybe needs more feedback, right? Maybe it doesn't look from the outside like it is completely like producing equality, but it is fair and that people are getting what they need to strive and to be happy and feel that psychological meaningfulness. So there is also the procedural justice, and this is fairness in how decisions are being made. If people feel like the decisions are being made with transparency and that there is equity in the way that decisions are being made, and also this ties in to psychological safety because people are in the process of that decision making. People are having their feedback listened to. They are being validated in the way that decisions are being made. Then we move on to interactional or interpersonal, and this is as simple as fairness in how people are being treated. So if we think back to the recap slides of like prejudice and bias, if these things exist in the workplace, then people aren't going to feel like there is justice or like they are being valued the same or treated the same. This goes back to respecting people and treating people as individuals, meeting people where they're at. And so for the last one, we have informational justice, and this is whether organizations share adequate, truthful information. And this is both with their base and with their employees. So on their website, is it truthful and adequate what they're sharing? Are they doing performative activism or performative JEDI work where they're putting things on their website to look good, but they're not working to embody those values? And also, are they sharing truthful, adequate, and transparent information with the people that they're working with, right? That's so important for people to feel like they know what's going on and people to feel like they're a part of what's happening. So, of course, we're talking about the movement and not necessarily like an organization in like a company sense. But it's important to note that all of these things are from the perspective of like the employee or like a volunteer, a person who might not be at the top. Because if you were to ask a CEO if these things existed in their company, they would say, yeah, of course we're doing that. Of course we have all of these things, which might not be truthful. So it's based on the feelings of the people who are a part of the work, who are a part of the movement. So these are different things that as we work to make the movement a little more just, a little more equitable, these are things to consider, right? If people feel like they're being treated with respect, if people feel like they're a part of the decision process and like their opinions and ideas matter, and that they are being treated right, they're being fed the right information, they're not being lied to, and that they're getting the things that they need, they're getting that mutual aid to be able to be happy and feel comfortable and like the work that they're doing is very valued. So all of that kind of information, a definite overload maybe. But now we're going to talk about how to foster authentic connections.
Thank you, Sarah. So basically taking everything we just heard in this section between psychological safety and availability and those terms that Sarah just covered, that feeds us into this part here about fostering authentic connections. And this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but in our own personal experiences of organizing, we have found these things to go a long way. So if somebody feels safe enough to push back and not be punished for it, and then they care enough ultimately to be available, right, connecting all those pieces, then they have the seeds that are possible to actually move towards a connection that is genuine and real. And one way to go about that is to address microaggressions when they come up. And if this is a new term for you or you've heard this one, just to share, microaggressions are those everyday slights and indignities and put downs that ultimately are communicating something that is maybe hostile or derogatory or negative. One I've heard in my own life is that you speak so well for a young person, or you really carry yourself well for a woman. You know, those are ultimately microaggressions. The person maybe did not intend them to be hurtful, perhaps they did, but right, the interpretation being that, well, are other groups supposed to be carrying themselves better than young people and women? It leaves you questioning and feeling probably not that psychologically safe anymore to just be yourself and be able to push back or push in new ideas. So addressing them as they come up. And hopefully this is not something that just falls on the person that receives it, right? People should hopefully feel empowered and strong enough to stand up for themselves. But sometimes the world is weighing down on you, and if you hear one more negative thing, you're maybe going to explode. So you shut down, you don't say as much. It then becomes, I would say, more of the group responsibility when it comes from a culture of care to step up for that person, help call that person in or out, depending on the context, and say, what did you mean by that? I don't know if I understood what you meant by that comment. Can you share more? There's a lot of ways to say it, but it's important to say that it doesn't always, again, have to come from the person receiving the comment to step up for themselves. It takes committed, caring people to do it as well. And then another part of fostering authentic connections is really working to decentralize dominant culture. And really within the work that we do. Is this any better? It's still coming through kind of staticky. Hopefully my laptop's not overheating or something. I'm kidding. It's last. Let me toggle my sound on and off. Thank you. Is this any better? also try one more thing just to connect to a larger sound system I have. Okay. I hooked it up to something else now. Is that any better? So sorry. Oh, no. Thank you. Um, yeah, if it gets to be any worse, I might pass it over to a teammate here. But to speak to these last points here as well, um, decentralizing dominant culture means, right, moving away from just accepting that the white American experience is the only way to, right, make decisions and place value on things. We have to recognize that there is, of course, immense diversity in the US and in Colorado, and not everyone is going to be English speaking or, yeah, went to higher education schools, and really just moving away from assuming those norms is so important for giving people space to feel that what they are bringing to the table is still valuable and authentic. And we said this a bit earlier as well, but just to emphasize again that people need to often be encouraging and asking for real feedback. I think that is so important in ensuring that we don't um, allow ourselves to get into those blind spots. So making sure that we really do mean it when we say it too. Because if you hear something you didn't expect to hear, didn't want to hear, sit with it. Consider what it is about that message that isn't working for you. And it's to say too that not everyone is going to come with you to you with feedback that is maybe completely true in some ways, but we have to find ways to ensure that people are sharing it for a reason, right? They felt compelled, you asked for it, so listening to it and taking stock of it is important. And then the last thing I'll say is creating together is such an important way in any grassroots movement to create real connections. Here in this picture, you see an event we held earlier this year in which, after a presentation and sharing about our work, we made signs for a protest that was coming up. And participants were able to bring their creativity, their own language, their own ideas, and bring them into making art. And that also might be making music together or creating tools for others to be able to use. But anytime we can tap into our creative nature, which is just an innate part of being a human, everyone's creative. Don't ever let anyone tell you or believe that you're not. We all just have different kinds of creativity. But when we can really create something that is beautiful and meaningful and communicating something that's just words on a page, I think connections that come from that have more resiliency and a sense of care. So figure out ways maybe to bring that type of creation into the work you do. Is that any better? Still staticky? I'm sorry. Okay. Well, that wrapped up the first block. So we're on our last block now here on building diversity and disrupting the status quo. Does anyone have any questions about anything before I hand it over to Matt? Okay. Well, please feel free to, yeah, drop in the chat if so, raise your hand. Give it to Matt.
All right. So earlier, I was speaking a little bit more to, yes, like psychological availability after we had spoken a little bit about psychological safety. And this is going to be a conversation centered around psychological meaningfulness. And I want to preface this by saying that we are going to have a bit of a discussion at the end that is going to be centered around this idea of psychological meaningfulness. So I'm going to give you some examples from my life that'll hopefully help a little bit with yeah, help you think about it a little bit. So first and foremost, psychological meaningfulness is the feeling that one's work or life is valuable and important, and that provides a sense of accomplishment. It effectively can be summarized in that little graphic to the right of it of what drives you. Why do you do what you do? And why is that rewarding to you? Personally, I was in college going to school for business marketing, and I was very prepared to go out there and sell as much as I could because I thought I was excited to do that. But as I moved through my college days and I ran into the right people, I got connected with the sustainability crew at the University of Wyoming, and it really started to build this whole foundation of sustainability and wanting to combat climate change, and finally realizing that, oh my gosh, there's something I can do about that, and then actually being involved in it and seeing how that went just gave me a certain sense of accomplishment that I hadn't felt with a lot of other work that I had done. And so that's, I guess on some level, a smaller representation of that in just one avenue. It can relate to, anything in your work or life, but I guess that relates to the job that I currently have and the work that we currently do here. So moving down to that next part right there, it can also be defined as the value of a work goal in relation to an individual's own standards or ideas. So yeah, in terms of like goals that you've got in your life, for example, maybe a goal you might have is, oh, I want to be able to, show my kids this, beautiful area out in Western Colorado, for example, an area that might be more, adversely subjected to climate change. I'm relating it back to climate change again. Sorry for that. And so you decide that you want to do work to protect that area out there. You want to, let's pretend you want to block the Uinta Basin oil train. How are your goals getting you to that point of psychological meaningfulness? How is it relating to your life in a way that's positively impacting your ideals? This last bolded point down there, so why are you passionate about the things that you're passionate about? That can really, once again, summarize what it means when we're talking about psychological meaningfulness. So I want you all to think not just about your work, not just about, your day-to-day interactions in life, but what drives you and why does it drive you? That is the can of worms that we're going to be opening a little bit down the road. But when we're talking about the psychological meaningfulness here and how that relates to our lives, is arguably the most foundational point of why people do what they do on any given basis. So it's really exciting to think about, really exciting to talk about. Very, very excited to have that conversation later on. But moving on to gaslighting and how to combat it. In so many ways, gaslighting is the antithesis of a lot of these different psychological well-being concepts that we've been bringing to your forefront. They can break down a lot of these foundations that we create, and I want to just speak a little bit about how to recognize, when that's happening, how to combat it, what it is. So yeah, I guess to start off here, what is gaslighting? Does anyone know about gaslighting? Does anyone yeah, raise your hands maybe. Has anyone experienced it or know what it is? Yes. So. Okay, yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about recognizing it because it can show up in so many forms and you might not even realize at certain points that you're being gaslit. They can happen through lying, trivializing, withholding, invalidating emotions, blame shifting, and projecting. I think, one of the most common ones that people come across is this very dismissive, tone that people can take with others. When you have, maybe you're really passionate about something going on in Colorado. Maybe you're really passionate about the Suncor oil refinery and really passionate about, shutting that down and getting it stopped. And maybe you're really well versed in what's going on out there. But you start speaking to somebody, maybe it's a government official, maybe it's just your buddy who's like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, sure, I'm sure it is. Things like that. Those kind of phrases can, really break down your own self-confidence in what you're speaking about. The end goal for a lot of these gaslighters at the end of the day is to make you, feel small, to make you not feel like you know what you're talking about, to make you feel like you're going to begin to question yourself. And those are all very, very toxic behaviors. So when you recognize it's happening to you, when you realize that this is something that's actually going on, how do you combat it? Number one, above everything else, is just don't give into it, no matter how hard it may be. that is exactly what a lot of gaslighters want. As soon as you begin starting to defend yourself and go down this whole rabbit hole of, this is why I'm right, and then they continue to gaslight you, you might realize that it might not be worth having that conversation. Um, Sometimes people aren't meaning to gaslight you. It might come from a place of actual curiosity, and in that case, I would fully recommend having that conversation. But yeah, don't entertain it if you can help it. In certain situations, a gaslighting experience can turn to not being a safe one. And in that case, it's even if it's not just a physical unwell being or a mental one, being aware of that and realizing that you always have the power to remove yourself from a situation, and that's very very important. It kind of comes into this idea of calling out a behavior if you're in a place to do so, or calling in that behavior. When we're talking about calling in that behavior, it's kind of realizing that, like, I realize what's going on here. I understand what this person is doing to me. Nothing good is going to come from me fighting back on this. They at the end of the day probably just want to gaslight you and make you feel less adequate. So when it comes to this whole idea of gaslighting, I'm wondering if anyone here has any questions about that. If anyone wants to have any kind of a discussion with this, because I can speak to some of my own examples, but I also know that it's kind of a tough subject, and that a lot of times you might not even realize that you're a victim of gaslighting. So I just want to open the floor really quickly to anybody that has any kind of comments about it. From my own perspective, I've had various jobs throughout my life, but the one that I think back to a lot were my days of being a camp counselor out in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. Starting as a junior counselor, moving up to eventually a supervisor. The way that you're sometimes treated when you have an idea of, I feel like this would be a really fun activity for the kids, or maybe we should consider doing something this way. The bosses that I had at that time, in that role, were very dismissive of my ideas, and partially, I thought I understood it. I thought, this makes sense because I'm 18. Maybe I don't really know what I'm talking about. But it took me a little bit of time to kind of realize from my own perspective that you never know who's going to come up with a great idea. You don't know how great the idea is really going to be until you talk it through or you try it. And then realizing that as I progressed in that role and moved up through the tiers out there, how much more willing people were to listen to my ideas. And yeah, it's just from my personal perspective there is just, yeah, don't give into it, and at the same time, just don't let it actually win. Don't feel like you are inadequate and that you don't know what you're talking about when you really do. But yeah, if anyone has any other comments on that, I'll open the floor one more time. But if not, I will pass it over to Chelsea here to speak about the 4 eyes of oppression.
Thank you, Matt. Is that any better? I tinkered with my sound a tiny bit. Hopefully it's not worse. Still.
About the same, yeah.
Try one more thing. I think that fixed it. Okay. Well, apologies if that did not help any, but to speak to these 4 eyes of oppression here. Oh, something in the chat. Any better if I'm up this close to my laptop, to the camera?
Actually, yeah, a little bit. I think so.
Or am I frozen? Okay. It froze up there for a second. I think you're all back now. Is it doing the same? Any better this close up to the laptop? Maybe it's time.
I think it's probably as good as it'll be for right now, I think.
Poor laptop. She needs to retire. Okay, well, as long as you can hear me enough, and if not, Matt or Sarah, you tell me if it makes sense for you to step in to cover this. But to build off of what Matt was saying there with gaslighting, and thinking about what it takes to build diversity, right? If someone comes into the space that is of a different cultural background, language speaking ability, gender identity, age, ableism, whatever that might be, right, they should be able to be in a space fully and authentically without having to worry that somebody is going to second guess them or lie to them or make them basically think that their reality is different than what it actually is. And when that's happening, it could be one of these four eyes of oppression. And unfortunately, the way that these work, they feed into one another. So ideological there being kind of the very big vessel that holds the rest of the three. That is the system of beliefs of how things work. And that oftentimes is coming from cultural influences, societal influences, things we heard our whole life growing up. And then as it moves into the interpersonal, this is really how we're treating each other and being taught of what is right and what is other. So this is where microaggressions, as I spoke to earlier, is a part of that, or the forms of justice that Sarah spoke about, and that is everyone being treated the same? If I'm on a team, am I being held to the same standards as my colleague? Those things come up and are really key to dismantling oppression. And then institutional, this could be those laws that basically also decide what is right and how they're expressed in places like schools or bodies of government. And these ones are really hard to break down. They could have decades, if not hundreds of years built upon them that have defined what they see to be the only way, the right way. So this one takes a lot of time to dismantle. And internalized is a really hard one because that can come from gaslighting, right? If you're always in a space in which someone is second guessing what you have to say or invalidating what you're contributing, you might just start to adopt and believe those things, those stereotypes and those biases that people have projected against you. And sometimes, even if your community around you is supportive and is telling you what is right or true about you, you may have internalized this to the point that it is just too hard to break up. So doing that self-reflective work and really finding ways to love and care for yourself when you notice that your internal dialogue maybe isn't so kind or isn't so nice. So kind of some technical terms, but hopefully to give you some context and thinking as you go about your day-to-day, your organizing, and thinking how might this person or groups of people be experiencing oppression, being gaslit, and therefore not wanting to show up, not wanting to put time and effort in because it's not a safe and meaningful thing to do. Which leads us to our last term for tonight, and then we can have some discussion here. Tokenism. This is something Sarah mentioned early on and is most certainly an issue in the climate movement and other places. And tokenism ultimately is creating an illusion of harmony and representation for the purposes of, for lack of a better word, parading people as a trophy to say, we're diverse. So that could be a team of all white people, let's say, but one teammate amongst them that is someone of color. And then that group being able to say, well, we're diverse. Look at this person over here. Don't you see? That's deeply harmful for lots of reasons, because for someone that experiences being tokenized, it can provide a variety of hardships, right? This heightened visibility. Why do you keep pointing to me as the person of color? I know that. It can make them feel isolated, that something that they didn't, want to have called out all the time, perhaps. And then really damaging, it can result in limited opportunities for advancement, because a lot of times what we see in organizations or corporations is that the people that hold the most power, there's a disproportionate amount of people of color and women and people with different abilities at those ranks. It is still predominantly held by white, wealthy, privileged men, older men for that matter. And tokenism helps keep that going in a lot of ways. So the bottom line is that tokenism does not really care about being inclusive. It's performative, it's harmful, and it really does allow people to not be their authentic selves. So it's important to describe too that there is the experience of being tokenized, as I've mostly spoke to here, and the experience of being told that you are tokenizing someone. So two sides of the coin there. And when that happens, in order to, combat tokenism and take ownership for causing harm, it requires that we dispel the expectation that somebody that holds a diverse identity is the spokesperson for their community, especially without their expressed consent. It's very different if that person on the team comes forward time and again to say, yes, please ask me, please help me represent my culture or my people, whatever that might be. If that's what's happening, and that's great. But if they have never said that they wanted that, and yet people on the team continue to point to them or ask for their input, hey, as a Latino, what do you think about this? That's really just limiting somebody's ability to be their full self. So it's important to provide meaningful and challenging opportunities so that people can participate in a way that they want to. They can be a decision maker amongst their team in the ways that they want to be. And if somebody comes to you and says, you doing these things made me feel tokenized, hopefully your first response is not, what are you talking about? You're full of it. I never meant to do that. I would never do that. That's all gaslighting, right? You're not giving that person space to just tell their truth, and you sit with the uncomfortableness of hearing that. Because a lot of times I think tokenism comes from, or being told that you're tokenizing someone, it's coming from a place maybe of care and wanting to include that person, but it's kind of being gone about the wrong way, right? It's resulting in these harmful outcomes. So when someone potentially comes to you or your group and says, these things made me feel tokenized, the first response should be to listen, to not be defensive, to really hear that person, and to ask for even more examples potentially in a curious way, in a way that says, I hear what you're saying, I'm trying to understand more, please give it to me. And I think it goes farther than that. It comes back to the ethnocentrism that Sarah spoke about earlier, that realizing that we're kind of projecting this one identity and outlook, but then cherry picking all of a sudden that this person represents that which isn't mine. Maybe I should keep putting them on a pedestal to speak about something or to decide something that they don't want to. So articulating a clear vision for inclusive standards within your group, within your workplace, within the movement is really important. And then not just articulating it, but living by it. Really striving to build diverse representation, and ones that aren't just about race either. We've certainly talked about a lot of those examples tonight, but there's diversity in our ages and our education and our income and all these other things, right? We need to have a more holistic view of what it means to build diversity and not just focus on the color of someone's skin. That is a part of it, but it's not the only thing, right? So if we work to really acknowledge and celebrate what it is that makes us unique, each and every one of us, that's going to allow people to contribute in a way that they wish to, and is hopefully going to create authentic connections and make people feel like they're a part of something important. Yeah. So with that, and maybe I'll lean on you, Matt and Sarah, a little bit if my audio is still giving some struggles here. Some discussion here. Kind of going back to and summarizing this section about building diversity and that coming from psychological meaningfulness is a very important term for us as we got further into this work. And as a reminder, there's the definition there, the feeling that one's work or life is valuable and important, and it provides a sense of accomplishment. So sitting with that, And I will pause the recording here in just a second. Um, what does psychological meaningfulness look like or feel like for you? And going a little bit past that, even, what gives you a sense of value or purpose in the climate movement? Maybe this is something you've done, you can point to, and that's how it felt and it was great. Or maybe it's something you're aspiring to and trying to bring more about in your organizing. Pause this. So with that, to wrap it up, so many moving parts, so many different things here. We wanted to just kind of put it very open-endedly as well, that we just got done having a couple conversations, but if there were just more broad reflections or questions, these are not prompts you have to follow, but ones we wanted to put in your ear. If there was anything that surprised you, something you learned, something that didn't make sense, something we should consider modifying for some reason, which we're very open to, welcome to put it in the chat or come off mute. Just anything along those lines. And maybe I should add as well that if this space right now does not feel like the space for that, you are more than encouraged to get a hold of one of us here and have some separate space together. I recognize that sometimes that's what's best. So if you have those ideas or thoughts, they're jotted down, I can save them for another conversation or this. That is also fair as well.
Well, I'm just really appreciative in how you've put it together and the types of things you covered, because I've got another little company called Diversity Innovators, and we've been a bit dormant over the past year, 6-8 months as we've worked more on the election and on climate, in particular for me. But I found a number of things that I'd like to bring more into my work in that arena.
Nice.
We were working mostly relative to JEDI in the workplace at the time. And we did what's called a narrative research, where you interview a fewer number of people, but with a wide variety of types, and pull all that together. And that was a real learning experience. And this has been too. I appreciate it. In fact, I'm real excited about sharing these slides. I've been doing screenshots.
Oh, cool.
Sharing these with my climate team. So I know we had someone who I think saw herself as a token. She was brilliant, and we loved her and loved having her, but she did finally leave the team. It was painful. You felt like had we, what did we do or not do that led to that?
Thank you for sharing that, because it definitely happens. It's very real. And yeah, that we will be sharing these slides too, so that in addition to your screenshots, you can hopefully have more tools at your fingertips for that, because we want this to be, useful outside of tonight and beyond, and help strengthen the movement in different ways.
Yeah. Nice. Let me ask this. Are you experiencing on the other side of digging into this arena, are you experiencing that you're getting more diversity interest in working in climate?
I would say within certain dimensions of diversity, yes. It has been something that has shifted. I've been on the team for 3 years, and it has certainly ebbed and flowed in that time. But there are other ones that I think we are still a little bit more limited in. And for whatever reasons they are, it kind of keeps my brain racking about why can't we get, more people of color on our team, or people that are English speaking as a first language, right? There's other instances where I see where we have room for improvement. Sarah, Matt, you see it differently within your campaigns or teams or anything to add to that?
And then I'll do a little personal plug here. I'll be helping with if any of you are in Platt Park or near there, they're doing a community, a climate action forum in 2 weeks on Saturday, the 26th. So you're welcome to come to that.
If you have any links or information about that to plug into the chat or something, I would definitely.
I'm trying to think what their registration link is. I could probably send you all something after.
Or that too. Yeah, if you know how to email us, would love to see that.
Yeah.
I'm all for a plug. That's bear with me.
It's not my normal way of operating. I've been trying to get out of my comfort zone in this get out the vote work. And
nice.
I've knocked on a door. I've not gone out door knocking yet.
Yet.
But every day get a little bit closer to, okay, maybe I could do that. I can write postcards and letters and phone bank. I can do that.
That's right.
But yeah.
My hat is tipped to you. I love anyone that pushes their own comfortability in those ways. It's really admirable. It's bold. It's needed.
Yeah, well, I've often told people, give me a group of 50 to 300 people and I can bring a process and I can work with them in whatever they need to get done. But don't make me schmooze with the board the night before. You know, those things are harder for me, but
very fair.
And a great group and very well presented. Thank you for tonight. And
thank you.
I'm going to have to scoot. Oh, next steps.
I was going to say, this is the second to last slide. It's just like
I'll hang out.
Final, yeah, that you all figured out that we've recorded this so you can reference it back. We'll share it with you all via email once it's ready and processed. And that, yeah, if you're not already, consider joining one of our committees or local teams or campaigns and really bring your authentic self, your lived experience, your ideas, and bring others along too, as much as possible to create that more diverse and equitable movement. And as we said too a moment ago, like we really are always open to feedback and suggestions and ways to make these things more impactful and accessible and inclusive. So that volunteer email is one way to get a hold of us, but we'll all drop our emails here in the chat if you don't have them handy. Because yeah, as we said at the beginning, we are not the czars of right and knowing everything. There are definitely ways to do things differently and better, and we're here to learn and be a part of that. So thank you so much for being here and for being a part of this. It was great to have an intimate group here tonight and really be able to, speak openly and freely and from the heart. And hopefully you do get some restful time here in the next couple hours of your day and your weekend ahead. We value you all so much for what you contribute day in and day out to make the movement better, more diverse, more equitable.